Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel again. Today's video, we're back on the 1999 Dyna Wide Glide again. We're going to be doing a 3-hole oil change. If you've seen the other videos on this bike, you'll know this is a new to me bike. I won it in a raffle. We've already done some modifications like the handlebars. We plan on doing some more paint work, some floorboards, other things like that. But in today's video, we're going to be doing maintenance on it. As I explained in the other videos, I don't know when the last time any of this stuff was done, so we're going to go ahead and do it, get it out of the way. We know it's done, we know when it was done, and we know that it was done right. So we'll get started on that. I'll show you the tools that you need to get started with, and we'll get going. Okay, so the stuff you're going to need to get started here to do this 3-hole oil change are the tools that I've got laid out here on the bench. We're going to need a T27 Torx bit to get our derby cover off to do the primary fluid. We're going to need a T40 Torx bit to get the drain plug out of the primary. We're going to need a 5/8 socket with a ratchet and possibly an extension to get the transmission oil plug out and the engine oil plug out. We're going to need 2 new O-rings for our 2 plugs on the engine and the transmission. And of course your oil for the various holes, a new oil filter for the engine, a funnel to get the oil back in it, and a torque wrench to put the drain plugs back in and make sure you don't over tighten them and split the O-rings. Of course, you're also going to need a drain pan, which I've got over here. And I've got a magnetic tray handy to hold all the drain plugs and the 5 Torx bits there in the derby cover. So we'll start by getting the derby cover off. I always like to do that first in order to make sure that those 5 screws will come out. I've seen bikes in the past where the heads of those bolts are stripped, or for whatever reason the bolt is seized in the primary case there. And you don't want to drain all the oil out of it and then turn around and find out that you can't open up the fill hole to put oil back in it. Now on this bike, we could also take the chain inspection cover off here and fill it through that hole. You could do that either way on this bike. So one thing I didn't mention before I got started on doing this oil change is that you want the bike up to operating temperature before you do it. So take the bike out on a good 10, 15, 20-minute ride. Bring it back and then start changing your oils. That'll help get all that dirty oil out of the engine, the primary, and the transmission, and it'll make your oil change a lot more effective, for lack of a better word. You won't be leaving old oil trapped inside the system because it's cold. Okay, so like I said, I want to crack these 5 screws loose before I hit the drain plug just to make sure that they're all going to come out. If it's a new to you bike like this one is, you don't know what the screws are doing. If it's your bike that you've had for a while, you've done this service before, then you know the screws are in good shape or they're not, and so forth. You don't have to really worry about what I'm worrying about. So far, all of these are cracking loose easy, coming out good, so we shouldn't have any problems getting them the rest of the way out. So let me show you where the drain plug's at on this. Okay, so right here under the primary, under the derby cover, is your transmission drain plug right there. As I said a minute ago, you're going to need a T40 Torx bit to go up in the middle of that. Pull that down out of there. That's going to drain the oil out of your primary. As long as we're here, we're going to look right here, and we're going to see the engine oil drain plug. So you can get both of these. If you're draining all 3 holes, you can get both of these at the same time with one drain pan without moving it. Long way of saying you can drain both holes at one time. The transmission drain plug is on the other side of the bike, and we'll get that in a minute. But for now, I'm going to get the drain pan under here, get both these plugs out, and start draining our engine and primary. All right, so I'm going to get the engine oil drain plug first because it's farther back under here. I'd be sticking my hands in the primary oil if it were draining already. That's tighter than it needs to be. Somebody really reefed down on it here. All right. So this drain plug is a little tighter than it needs to be. It's an O-ring seal, so it's going to seal pretty easily. And I think we'll look in the book here in a minute and get you a correct and accurate, for sure, torque value. But I believe the torque value on this drain plug is something like 14 to 20 foot-pounds, which isn't very much at all. So there's the engine oil plug. It's got a little bit of stuff here on the drain plug, and that oil is dirty. It's black. So it's a good thing that we're doing this. It looks like it hasn't been done in a long time, which engine oil you can tell by the dipstick, and transmission oil as well. You can kind of get an idea of the color of them at least, just by looking at the dipstick. But even if the oil's fairly clean, like on my Street Glide, I keep it maintenance real well. So when it's time mileage wise for an oil change on that, the oil still looks, brownish. It's definitely not black like this is. So once we get that oil draining, you want to go around the other side, pull the oil fill plug out, the dipstick. You want to take it out or loosen it up anyway, and that's going to let air flow through to help drain all the engine oil. I usually do it in the order that I just showed you, as far as taking the drain plug out and then coming and taking the lid off, because it just helps keep your hand a little bit cleaner. Not as much oil rushes out when you first pull the drain plug out. But you can see now how much thicker of a stream of oil we have now that I've popped that loose on the other side. So now I can go ahead and take the drain plug out of the primary. We need our T40 Torx bit for that. You want to make sure you get this up in the plug well, because you don't want to take a chance on, there it goes, take a chance on stripping the plug out if you don't have it up in there all the way. This plug wasn't super tight. It was about where it needed to be. Primary oil don't look too bad. Can you see that where I'm holding that? A few little porcupines there on the primary. That's normal. This is a normal amount, so nothing to worry about. All right, so now that I've got those draining, I can go ahead and pull this primary or derby cover the rest of the way off. These 5 screws that we broke loose a minute ago. Another good thing to have on hand when you do this, I didn't show you a minute ago when I said the stuff you're going to need, is either a gasket or an O-ring for this derby cover. This one has an O-ring in it. A lot of times you can reuse the O-ring. Some people say you can reuse them, which you can reuse them. Some people say it's stupid to reuse it because the O-ring is literally a couple dollars. And as long as you got it apart, you might as well replace it. So, whichever way you view that argument. I don't think there's, if the O-ring looks good like it does, it's not completely flattened out, which it's not. I don't have the problem go ahead and reusing it. I do have an O-ring laying over there on the part shelf just in case we got this apart and it looked like it needed it. So I do have one on hand just in case. But this one looks fine. While you're doing this, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you how to get this old O-ring off of here and put the new one on. These O-rings definitely need to be changed. I know a minute ago I said you could leave the derby cover O-ring alone if you wanted to. Go ahead and change them on the drain plug. Reason being, if the derby cover leaks, you can always stand the bike up on a flat jack and change that O-ring without losing any oil, without needing to change the oil again to fix that problem. If a drain plug's leaking, you have to drain all the oil out to get in here, obviously, and then you have to put brand new oil back in it. So you're really wasting oil if one of these leaks. You want to get under here with the pick. I'm trying to do this through the viewfinder, and it's really, I don't know what it looks like for you. I won't be able to tell until I edit this, but it's really hard to see this O-ring through the viewfinder. This O-ring looks like it's just ripping apart from what I can see through the viewfinder here. But yeah, that's not even an O-ring. That's what you call it, pipe thread sealer that somebody's put on there. You want to use an actual rubber O-ring on these. I got them here in this tray. You can buy a pack of like 50 of them or 100 of them on Amazon for a couple dollars. And both of my bikes, being twin cams, both of them use the same O-ring for the drain plugs. So get the old stuff off of there, dry it off real good. Take your new O-ring. The way I like to do it, you don't want to poke a hole in it or cut it. So I'll stick my pick way down in there and then just kind of wind it around the drain plug to get it down in the groove, about like that. See, I'm keeping the end of the pick well away from the drain or the O-ring, so it's sure not to get cut. But just work it down in the groove like that, go around it a couple times so it settles in place, and that's all there is to it. So before I put this back in, I'm going to wipe some oil around here to lube up this drain plug. The primary and the engine oil have both been draining for about 30 minutes now, so I can go ahead and put these two drain plugs back in, and we'll go over and drain the transmission. Got that torqued down to 18 foot-pounds right in the middle of the spec. Got both drain plugs back in, so now I'm going to go over and pull the drain plug. I'll show you where the drain plug on the transmission's at and get that pulled out and drained. Okay, so for the transmission drain plug, we want to come over to the right side of the bike. Transmission, go straight underneath. And right here where my finger's at is the transmission drain plug. I'll try and get you down under there where you can maybe see it a little bit better. Yeah, right there. So that's pretty much straight under the transmission itself out here on the outside, the clutch housing. It takes a 5/8 socket to get it out, just like the engine oil drain plug. So we'll go ahead and get that out of there and get it draining. So that one wasn't nearly as tight as the engine oil drain plug was. Which is good. As I said, it doesn't have to be that tight. I have a feeling I'm about to make a mess all over the place here in just a second. Maybe not. Maybe not. That oil's nice and clean looking. A little bit of material on the drain plug and the magnet, nothing to worry about. It's kind of strange in a way, the primary and the transmission, color-wise, which tells you a little but not a whole lot. Color-wise, they were both pretty decent. And the engine oil was black. You'd think people would change oil in the engine more often than they would the transmission or the primary. Those tend to get forgot about, but I don't know. Here we are. All right, transmission fill plug on these is right here on the front. These don't need to be very tight at all. Just snug. It's not going to fall out of there, so don't worry about that. But once we get the drain plug out, just like we did on the engine oil, once we get the drain plug out, we'll go ahead and pull the transmission dipstick loose so it can vent and get all that drained out of the transmission. Here's the fill for the engine oil. We're not going to fill that yet, but I know a minute ago I told you to come over and open it up. That's where it's located. Once we get the transmission drained and the plug back in it, we can move up, take the engine oil filter off, and then all we got left to do is fill everything back up. So, all right, one thing I didn't mention earlier, but I just thought about, I like to do my service with the motorcycle straight up and down like this on the lift. And the reason for that is to check the transmission and the primary, the bike has to be stood straight up. So you can do that with a flat jack. You can do that somebody sitting on the bike holding it up while you check the oil. Either way, but I like to do it just on the lift. Makes it easy for me. Our transmission's done draining, so get this drain plug back in it, torque down, and then we can move up front and change the oil filter. And we'll be just about done with this project. You always want to start the plugs by hand, run them in with a stubby ratchet or your fingers, just like the stubby ratchet I'll show you here in a second. It's real handy for doing this. One, it gives you more clearance than a big ratchet does, and also you can't get that much torque on it to cross thread stuff, or if you don't use a torque wrench, you can't tighten it really tight, too tight, unless you're really working at it with a stubby ratchet. Same torque on this drain plug, same as the engine oil was, 14 to 21 foot-pounds. So that's ready to go, ready to fill back up. We're going to move up front and get the engine oil filter off of it now and change that out. And all we got left to do is fill up everything, and we'll be done with this 3-hole oil change. Engine oil filter on the twin cam is up here in the front. I already broke this loose off camera. This thing was tight. So not only do they not do oil changes very often, they tighten the filter up about a turn farther than it really needed to be. I got that broke loose. It just spins off just like your car oil filter does. Again, lots of black oil coming out of that. There's really not a good way to do this without making a mess. As far as the oil draining down all over the case and the bottom motor mount or whatever you've got in the way. Touring bikes have the voltage regulator down in here. Usually I'll just let it go and get on what it's going to get on, then I'll hit it with a spritz of brake clean before I put the new filter back on. There's a sticker on the end of the filter here, but I don't know if that was an oil. Yeah, it looks like an oil change sticker, but I can't see any writing on it. It'd be neat to know when the last time they had this done was. All right, new filter's back on. Make sure that you take some oil and wipe it on the new O-ring of the new filter. And also, some people like to fill the filter first. This sitting sideways, you can't really fill it all the way, or the oil obviously dumps out when you go to screw it on. I fill it about halfway and then let the filter sit there for a few minutes before I put it on. That oil will soak into the media inside the filter media, and that'll keep it from as much leaking out. You know, you can hurry up and spin it on there before anything runs back out of the filter. So that's the way I do it. Filter just has to be hand tight. I mean, there's no need to put a wrench on it to tighten it up. What you can get on it hand tight is plenty. When that O-ring swells up a little bit, it's going to be even tighter than you just tightened it, and it's going to be good to go. There's no need to put a tool on it. So everything's drained. Drain plugs are back in. Oil filter's on. We can go ahead and start filling everything up. We're going to go ahead and start with the primary, and I'll show you here in the book the level that the primary needs to be filled up to. Okay, so here in the service manual, this picture is showing us the lubricant level in the primary case. So if you look in the derby cover, you're going to see the clutch. And if you look down inside the clutch or down inside the derby hole, you'll see the bottom of the clutch basket. Okay, that's where the oil needs to come up to. Not all the way to the up here, not completely covering the bottom of the clutch plates, just up to the bottom of the basket, and that's all. So the book says that's about 26 ounces approximately, which is a little less than a quart. So put most of your quart in, half your quart in, and then start kind of eyeballing for the level there. Also, you'll need to pour it in, let it sit for a minute or two, because that oil has to run all the way to the front of the primary case and fill up the front of the primary case as well. So you may have to fill it up here, let it sit, it's going to go down, fill it up again, it's going to go back down. Kind of do that number until you get it where it needs to be. The oil, you're going to get 100 different answers on what oil to use, okay? Some people say you can use 20/50 in each hole, which you can. You can put that in all 3 holes that we've drained out. Some people like to run a heavy oil in the transmission, like an 80/90, 75/140, something like that. I choose to use the AMSOIL specific oil for each hole. Okay, they've got a primary fluid, a transmission fluid, and an engine oil. I've noticed a lot less noise, easier shifting, easier to find neutral and all that using the specific transmission oil and the specific primary oil. So that's what I do. Again, you'll find 100 different answers on the forums and on the internet and on YouTube as to what's best, which oil to use in what hole. So there you go. All right, another thing that's sometimes disputed on the forums or on the Facebook groups or wherever you're reading about your motorcycle maintenance is how to get oil back into the primary. Some people use a paper funnel. Some people use Harley sells kind of a odd shaped funnel that sits in right here and you pour the oil in. I haven't had any problem just using a regular funnel and going kind of right in here or here in the backside. You can't go apey with it. You got to pour a little slow, but at the rate I'm pouring right now, it's going in there fine. It's not leaking out the bottom of the derby cover or anything like that. So this is what I use, or the way I do it, I should say, and it works fine for me. It's also a good time to check the tension of your primary chain adjustment, and the adjustment of your clutch. It's right there looking at us if we need to adjust the clutch. The clutch on this bike's in good shape, good adjustment, so I'm not going to adjust it at all. I do need to adjust the primary chain, but I'm going to do that in a separate video because I've got a couple things to adjust, and I'm going to make one video out of all that and just leave this purely an oil change video. So if you want to know how to adjust a primary chain or check the adjustment on the primary chain, should have a video coming out from that probably a week after this one's released. So by the time you're watching this, it's probably out. So I've got most of the cord in there. I'm going to stop where I'm at, let it sit for a few minutes like I talked about, then look down in here, down in this way at the bottom of the clutch basket. And it should be right about here where I'm pointing, just covering the bottom edge of this when it's full of oil. But as I said a minute ago, I don't know if it made sense the way I said it or not, but when you pour the oil in back here, it has to run all the way up front here and fill up all these crevices in the bottom of the case. So you want to let it sit for a minute to make sure that you've got enough oil in the system. All right, so while we're waiting on the primary to fill up the front of the case like I was talking about, we can fill up the transmission and the engine. The book says 20 to 24 ounces of transmission fluid should put you right at the full mark. So again, a quart's 32 ounces, so you're looking at most of a quart. Okay, so for the transmission oil level check, I put most of the quart in, about 22 ounces, which is right in the window of what the spec was. So it says put the dipstick in with the bike straight up and down. You don't screw the dipstick in or anything. You just set it in on the threads and check it right there. And she's right on the full mark. So that's exactly what we needed on the transmission. We can go ahead and tighten that drain plug down now. Go ahead and put the engine oil in. It says 2.5 quarts in the book. Put 2.5 quarts in it. That'll be good enough for the cold check. Enough oil to run it and get it warmed up, because you always want to check it when the engine's warm to make sure that it's full. You don't want to, in other words, you don't want to fill it right up to the full tip-top line when the engine's cold, because it'll be overfull then after the engine warms up. You don't want to do that. So 2.5 quarts in the crankcase here. Then we can take the bike out, get it warmed up again, check the engine oil on the Jiffy stand, and that's all she wrote on that. So everything's going nice and smooth so far. We'll get this engine oil in it and then fire it up and let it run. Okay, now that this is set for a while we were filling up the engine and the transmission, I can look down in here and see that the oil level is right at the bottom of the clutch basket, just like it showed in the book. So we're done over here. Just a matter of putting the primary cover back on it now. Or not the primary cover, this is the primary cover. Put the derby cover back on it, and we'll be done with this job. Okay, so tightening these little bolts up, they don't have to be very tight. I'll get you the spec out of the book and put it on the screen right now. But it's basically just like the drain plugs were, just a little past snug. These are small bolts, are going into aluminum, so it doesn't take much to strip them out. You want to tighten them up in a star pattern like you just watched me. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that'll draw the cover on evenly onto that O-ring. That's another reason they don't have to be very tight, is because it seals with an O-ring. So I've got them just a little past finger tight. So I'm going to go get the spec out of the book, torque them down, take a rag with some brake clean or whatever your favorite cleaner on it. Glass cleaner works good. And get all these fingerprints and oil prints and everything else off the exhaust and off of the derby cover before you start the bike, because as this stuff starts to get warm, if it's got fingerprints or smudges all over it, not so much on the derby cover, but on like the exhaust, it can burn those blemishes into the chrome, especially on exhaust because it gets so hot so quick. So everything's full of oil now. I'm going to wipe it down, and then all we got left to do is start it and let it build oil pressure, check for leaks. So we're all done now. Take the bike out, get it warmed up, double check the engine oil like I said on the Jiffy stand. The book says take it out, get it warmed up, bring it back, put it on the Jiffy stand, shut it off, let it sit for a minute or two, and then check the oil. So 2.5 quarts will get you in the ballpark. You might have to add just a touch after that to get it up to where you want it when the engine's hot. So that's our video on the 3-hole oil change. Hope I covered everything. If you have any questions, please put them down in the comments. I answer all the comments that I get on any of my videos. So please take a look at the other videos on the channel. I've got other videos on this Dyna. I've got a lot of videos on my street glide, cars, trucks, some ride-alongs, just about anything that somebody might enjoy, be it something to do with motorcycles or automotive stuff. So take a look at those. Subscribe if you haven't. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'll see you again soon.